Aloha, Ronnie Landis here. So today's video is a very important principle, an important topic that each person walking this planet right now, I really encourage everyone, get this. Get this at the core of your spirit, understand this, and meditate on this one. The only sin a child of God is capable of making is judgment. The only sin a child of God is capable of making is judgment. My friend Sacred Steve Adler, the primary founder of Sacred Chocolate, he told me this a number of years ago. He's one of my few people I consider to be truly like a older brother to me, and he's talked to me many times about different things involving the heart. That's his religion, is the Sacred Heart, and he's the minister of the Sacred Heart, which I find just hilarious and really appropriate at the same time. And when I heard that quote, it just kind of like stopped me. I was like, ooh, okay. Where in my life am I causing sin? Remember, the word sin just means missing the mark. It's a term from archery, actually. And we just made it out into this whole other story, but it's just missing the mark. And why do we judge people so much? Why do we judge everything? There's so much judgment going on the internet right now. The different diets out there, the different ways of thinking, the different ways of living, different exercise routines, different personal development philosophies and entrepreneurial philosophies, and every single thing you can think of. There's two opposing banner flag raising groups. We might call that a bipartisan political system. And there's a good and a bad somehow. And somehow one side has God's vote and the other side is riding with the devil. And it's interesting how people make other people out to be wrong or make them out to be the bad guy because they have an opinion that appears to be diametrically opposed. It appears to be in conflict with their own bias, right? And I've been using that word bias a lot, cognitive bias. We have an addiction to our own biases because they're ours and they validate our lot in life. They validate why we are where we are, right? We make up excuses. I call this excusitis, where we're constantly just creating rationality to entertain why we are where we are in life. And if we see someone else that has a different approach, a different viewpoint, different philosophy, or different results that secretly we want, but we try to oppose those because they're different than ours, then we create all these cockamamie judgments about other people, right? To rationalize, one of them, I've been bringing this up a lot lately, but to rationalize why we have such a huge meat-eating culture and why we still need to validate the unconscious abuse of animals and somehow take an endogenous muscle of an animal, and that's going to actually somehow build our muscle. Right? That, to me, that doesn't make sense anymore because I'm not in that bias. But some people could say that, oh, well, you know what, Ronnie, now you're just in a vegetarian bias. You're in an anti-meat eating bias. And, you know, I accept that. That's valid, right? That's valid. It's my whole point about this is that no matter where you step on the front lines, there's always going to be two sides to every story. There's always going to be two perspectives. So it's really inappropriate for us to be throwing all this judgment and really just misguided anger and resentment and shame and guilt and fear at other people because they have a different experience. They were raised differently. They are a different culture. They have a different philosophy on life because of their different experience, right? So to throw out all this judgment everywhere is highly inappropriate. It's extraordinarily immature, and it doesn't really get us to where we all want to go, which is to the higher elevations of our ability to entertain new frames of consciousness, to entertain new ideas that actually help us evolve instead of what we're doing in society, which is devolving lower and lower. And I think that's overall the message here, is that it's time for all of us to open our heart It's time for us to open our mind like a parachute. Your mind doesn't work unless it's open, right? We need to open ourselves a little bit more and be more vulnerable. I think all this judgment that's being thrown out there in the airwaves has to do with the inability that people have to actually feel themselves, to actually be one with themselves. If you know who you are and you stand for what you believe in and you know your reason for being, you know what you're doing on this planet, then you don't really need to be throwing around all this judgment or be making up stories and propaganda about other people, because you're not paying attention to everyone else. You are paying attention to yourself. You are investing in the wellspring of wisdom that is you. And that's the difference between immaturity and wisdom. So anyways, I could go on about this one. This is one thing that's really bothered me over the years about the health community, is there's so much judgment and conflicting issues, not just informationally, because information is always changing, right? That's always changing and re-updating, and everyone has a different spin on it. So it's not so much about the information, it's about the perspectives that people are holding to validate outdated information or to validate previous experiences that they're carrying from their past into their present, into their future, and they're enforcing it upon everyone else, so they can feel like they are leading the ship, they're leading the tribe, or they somehow don't have to actually activate new levels of genius and reevaluate their original approach to a certain philosophy they once carried. Instead of doing that, instead of reinventing themselves, they'll just carry the same old thing into the future, and anyone else that has a different perspective, they will do all they can to discredit them and so on and so forth. We see that like in quackwatch.com. It's that kind of thing. It's just trying to discredit other people because they come from an alternative point of view. So there you go. Like my older brother, Sacred Steve Adler, says, the only sin a child of God can make is judgment. Peace and blessings.